My name is Emily. I am 30 years old now, and I am recording this because no one truly listened to me throughout the past years, and maybe it is time that I listen to myself at least. I was 12 years old when my mother married Richard. He was a man who looked respectable from the outside. He worked at a management consulting firm, wore elegant suits, smiled at the neighbors, attended city council meetings. The kind of man people trust the moment they see him. He never hit me. He never raised his hand. He never left a single mark that anyone could see. But he destroyed me in a completely different way. A way that leaves no blue bruises, only cracks in the soul that take years to repair. At first, it was small things, passing comments that could be ignored. He would say my hairstyle made me look older, that the way I walked was strange, that my laugh was loud and annoying. At that age, you believe everything adults say, so I started changing the way I walked, lowering my voice and tying my hair back all the time. My mother was very happy with her new marriage. She had been lonely for 2 years after my father's death. Richard treated her kindly in front of others. He bought her flowers, took her out to dinner, and I saw her laugh again after years of grief. So how could I tell her that the man who brought her back to life was slowly draining mine? Over time, things escalated. It was no longer just comments about my appearance. It became about everything. My intelligence, my abilities, my dreams. I got good grades in school, and he said the teachers felt sorry for me. When I said I wanted to study architecture, he laughed in a way that made me feel ridiculous and said that girls who study engineering end up alone because men don't like women who are smarter than them. Then he added in a fake paternal tone that he was only saying this for my own good. The frightening thing about Richard was not yelling. It was the calculated calm. He chose his words carefully and struck at the right moment when you were weak, tired, or in need of support. And he always did it when my mother was in another room, at work, or busy with something else. He was not foolish enough to do it in front of her. He knew exactly how to play the game. He began controlling the small details of my life. The time I came home from school, the friends I saw, the clothes I wore. He wrapped all of it in words like concern, responsibility, and fear for my future. My mother saw a caring man who wanted the best for her daughter, while I felt like I was slowly suffocating. When I was 15, I tried once to tell my mother. Carefully, I told her that Richard said things that hurt me. She looked at me with genuine surprise and asked what he said. But when I tried to explain, the words sounded so trivial. How do you explain to someone that a sentence like, "You don't understand things the way adults do," can break you? How do you explain that the look he gives you when you make a small mistake makes you feel like a failure? My mother said that Richard loved me, that he was just a little strict but kind-hearted, and asked me to try to get along with him. That was when I understood that I was alone. I chose silence. Not because I was weak, but because I realized that screaming, crying, and direct confrontation would not work with someone like him. He would flip everything and make me the problem. The rebellious teenager. The ungrateful girl who did not appreciate what he did for her. So I decided to wait, to learn, and to build myself in the shadows. I started reading everything about narcissistic and psychologically manipulative personalities, books from the library, articles online, testimonies from people who lived similar experiences. I understood that I was not crazy, that what was happening had a name, and that there was a clear pattern to his behavior. He used a technique called gaslighting, making you doubt your perception of reality, and practiced covert control by making you feel indebted to him all the time. I focused obsessively on my studies, not only because I wanted a better future, but because success was the one thing he could not fully take away from me. I earned a full scholarship to a university in another state. When I told them, my mother was very proud. Richard smiled coldly and said he hoped the university could handle my difficult personality. My mother laughed, thinking it was a joke. At university, the physical distance between us was a blessing. But I came home during breaks, and each time things got worse because I was no longer that completely silent girl. I was learning, growing, thinking independently, and that threatened him. He started undermining me in more subtle ways. He asked about my studies, then questioned the value of my major, asked about my friends, then hinted they were taking advantage of me. asked about my future plans, then said the market would not need people like me. That was when I began documenting everything. Not openly, but intelligently. I kept his text messages. Sometimes he sent messages that looked harmless on the surface, but were toxic in context. Like, I hope you finally learned something useful. Or, your mother is worried because you don't call much. Always framing me as the problem. I saved them in a private folder. I wrote notes after every important conversation. The date, the place, exactly what was said, how I felt and who was present, if anyone. There were moments in front of others when he dropped subtle remarks. Once, at a family dinner, he told my aunt in front of everyone that Emily was a difficult child, but we were patient with her, as if I were a repair project. Everyone smiled politely, but some looked uncomfortable. My cousin's daughter, who was 19, came to me later and quietly asked if I was okay. It was the first time someone had asked that question sincerely. I just nodded, but I remembered her name. She had seen something. I worked during the summers. Small jobs at first, then internships at engineering firms. I opened a private bank account that no one knew about. I saved every dollar I could. I didn't buy new clothes. I didn't attend expensive parties. I knew that real freedom begins with financial independence, and that anyone financially dependent on Richard would remain under his control forever. I graduated with honors and got a good job at an architecture firm in another city. I didn't move immediately. I returned home for a few months under the excuse of saving money to move, but the real reason was that I wanted to collect the final pieces. I needed final incidents, witnesses, clear evidence. I had decided that the final confrontation had to be perfectly executed. During those months, I saw my mother differently. I noticed how he controlled her too, but in a gentler way. He decided where they went, what they ate, who they visited, and she believed it was care. I saw him interrupt her mid-sentence and finish speaking for her, as if she couldn't express herself. She smiled and nodded. Her world had shrunk around him. She no longer saw her old friends often. Her old hobbies stopped. Even her opinions on simple matters always began with, "Richard says." One night, 2 months after my return, we were having dinner while the television aired a documentary about psychological abuse. Suddenly, Richard said these programs exaggerate too much, that people have become overly sensitive, and that the new generation can't handle any criticism. I looked at my mother, and she smiled in agreement. I looked at him and found him staring directly at me as he said it. His look said, "I know that you know I'm talking about you." I smiled calmly and said nothing, but I wrote everything down that night. 3 months later, I was ready. I had an apartment in the city I was moving to, a stable job, a bank account with a solid amount of money, my bags packed in my room but hidden, and a full folder of evidence. Messages, notes, dates, witnesses' names, and audio recordings of some conversations I recorded on my phone when he spoke to me in a humiliating way while I asked innocent questions that made him expose himself without realizing it. I had learned from my reading that the best way to deal with a manipulator is to make him believe he has won. Then he becomes reckless and reveals himself. I chose Saturday. Richard was home reading the newspaper in the living room. My mother was preparing lunch in the kitchen. I sat across from her at the table and calmly said, "Mom, I need to talk to you about something very important." She smiled and said, "Of course, sweetheart." I told her I needed her to listen to me fully before saying anything or calling Richard. Her expression changed slightly, but she nodded. I began with complete calm. No emotion, no tears. I told her that Richard had been psychologically destroying me for 12 years. That he never hit me, but did something worse. He made me doubt my worth, my intelligence, my right to exist. I saw her open her mouth to object, so I gently raised my hand and said, "Please listen." I took out the folder and began showing her the messages, the dates, the incidents. I played the recordings on my phone. In one of them, his voice was clear as he said, "You're lucky anyone tolerates your presence because most people would leave you." That was his response to an innocent question about my graduation project. My mother's face gradually went pale. She tried to find explanations. She said maybe he was joking. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe he was having a hard day. I was ready for that. I took out a paper where I had written dozens of incidents over the years and asked her, were all these days hard for him? I reminded her of the family dinner when he said I was a difficult child. I told her to call my cousin's daughter and ask her if she noticed anything strange that night. I reminded her of the times he tried to distance me from my friends, my dreams, my self-confidence, all with soft words and a fake paternal tone. She asked me in a trembling voice why I hadn't told her before. I told her I did tell her when I was 15, and she told me he was kind-hearted. And because I knew she wouldn't believe me without evidence. And because I knew he would turn everything against me. So I chose to wait until I was strong enough, and until I had enough proof that could not be denied. Richard walked into the kitchen at that moment and asked, in a normal tone, why things were so serious. My mother looked at him with eyes full of shock and confusion and said, "Emily says you've been hurting her psychologically." I saw his face change for a fraction of a second. I saw panic flash before he replaced it with fake surprise. He said, "What? That's completely ridiculous." He looked at me and said, "Emily, I'm sorry if you misunderstood anything I said, but I was always trying to help you. I was ready for that too." I looked him straight in the eyes and said calmly, "You never helped me. You broke me in a calculated, systematic way. I'm not here for an apology or justification. I'm here to tell my mother the full truth." Then I turned to my mother and said, "I love you, and I know you didn't notice because he was very careful not to do this in front of you. But I'm an adult now, independent, and I have no reason to lie or exaggerate. All I ask is that you think objectively about everything I've said, and that you observe how he treats you too, because I don't believe I'm the only one he controls." Richard finally exploded. He raised his voice and said this was madness, that I was an ungrateful daughter and that he had given me a roof, education, and support. I replied with chilling calm, "You didn't pay for my education. I earned a full scholarship. You didn't give me a roof, my mother did. And all you gave me was a constant feeling that I was less than. The difference between me and you now is that I'm no longer that scared little girl. I'm an independent woman, and I don't need anything from you. That's why I'm leaving today. Permanently." My mother fell completely silent. I saw the conflict in her eyes. Denial, shock, the beginning of realization. I told her I had rented an apartment and was moving out that day. My phone number would not change. I would always be there if she wanted to talk. But I would not return to that house as long as he lived there. Not because I hated him, but because I respected myself enough to know I did not deserve to be treated that way. I went upstairs, took my packed bags, and came back down. My mother was sitting in the kitchen, crying silently. Richard was trying to comfort her, telling her that her daughter was manipulating her and that I had been influenced by strange ideas at university. I stood at the door, looked at her, and said, "Mom, I'm not asking you to choose now. All I'm asking is that you open your eyes. Watch how he speaks to you, how he makes decisions for you, how he makes you feel like you need him. Remember who you were before him. Then decide." I left the house feeling an enormous weight lift from my chest. I wasn't exactly happy. The moment was painful. But I was free. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly breathing. In the weeks that followed, my mother didn't contact me. I knew Richard was working to convince her that I was the problem. I didn't pressure her. I gave her space to think. 3 weeks later, I received a text message from her asking if we could meet. We met at a cafe. She looked tired, older. She told me she had started noticing things. How he interrupted her, how he subtly mocked her opinions, how he made decisions without consulting her and then presented them as shared decisions. She told me she'd called my cousin's daughter and asked her about that night, and my cousin said she felt deeply uncomfortable with the way Richard spoke about me, as if I were a burden. My mother said she didn't know what to do. She was married to him. Her life was tied to his. I told her I wasn't asking her to leave him. That was her decision alone. But I would not return to a toxic environment. If she wanted us to stay in contact, I would be happy. But on my terms. I would not visit that house or sit at the same table with him. It took another 6 months. 6 months during which my mother observed him, kept her own notes, and slowly reclaimed parts of her old self. She reconnected with old friends. She returned to the art classes she used to love. She began making small decisions without consulting him. Each time, his reaction revealed more: hidden resentment, attempts to regain control, a condescending tone. Finally, one evening, she called me and said, "I'm going to ask for a divorce." I told her I was proud of her and asked if she was sure. She said, "Yes, for the first time in years, I'm sure of something." The divorce process was not easy. Richard tried every tactic: emotional manipulation, financial threats, attempts to damage her reputation among friends. But my mother had learned by then, and this time I was standing beside her.